Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly through time and across cold stone corridors until we stand before a medieval castle, its towers frosted white by winter's breath. Snow drifts pile along the battlements, and the wind moans as if the stones themselves are shivering. You're not merely visiting, you are stepping into the private world of kings and queens, when winter made the simple act of sleeping a nightly battle for survival. Imagine this vast hall of stone, yes, the same one that looks majestic in daylight, but as night falls, it becomes an echoing cave of icy drafts. You think you'd last here without modern heating? You probably wouldn't survive a single night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. You step into the royal bedchamber, and the chill hits like a slap of water. The walls are thick, yes, but stone stores cold like a miser hoards coins. The torches sputter and cast golden light, yet the heat rises no higher than your knees. Even wrapped in fur, you feel that bite creeping into your bones. A royal chamber is supposed to be a place of splendor, but in the dead of winter, it feels like a cavern. You smell damp stone, wool, and a faint trace of smoke that clings no matter how many fires burn. Look around, those vaulted ceilings soar overhead, designed more for grandeur than comfort. Their beauty mocks you in winter, because every gust of wind whistles through cracks and arrow slits. It's as if the castle itself has lungs, exhaling icy drafts upon its rulers. Historians still argue whether the architects deliberately sacrificed warmth for strength, or whether insulation simply never mattered to people used to cold. Either way, a king's wealth could not purchase an escape from frost. The grand bed waits at the far end, a four-poster so massive it resembles a stage. Drapes hang like velvet curtains at a theatre, meant not for show but for survival. The mattress is stacked thick, stuffed with feathers, straw, and whatever padding could be found. Still, when you press your palm into it, it feels oddly lumpy, uneven. Luxury in those days was relative compared to peasants sleeping on straw pallets by the hearth. This was paradise. Yet paradise still froze. Imagine the monarch disrobing, servants fussing with layers of linen and fur. The ceremony of bedtime wasn't just ritual, it was preparation for battle against the cold. A brazier smoldered nearby, sending curls of smoke into the canopy. The air smelled metallic, with hints of ash. Fireplaces crackled, but the flames were far too small to chase away the cold of a chamber large enough to echo footsteps. You tug your cloak tighter and wonder how anyone could sleep here at all. But sleep they did. Kings and queens were as human as you, needing rest to plot wars, sign decrees, or simply endure the monotony of endless ceremony. And so, they curled into beds, built like fortresses within fortresses, each curtain tied close to trap body heat. Outside the drapes, the room remained an icebox. Inside, if you were lucky, you found a pocket of warmth. A mainstream historical fact slips in here. Edward III of England, who reigned during the 14th century, was documented to have grand beds layered with multiple quilts and fur throws. Even so, complaints about cold are noted in his accounts, reminding us that wealth only softened, never erased, the discomfort. Quirks abounded too. One lesser-known tidbit reveals that some royals slept with dogs at their feet, not simply for companionship, but as living foot-warmers. A noble lapdog, or even a sturdy hunting hound, could provide more comfort than any feather quilt. Picture that, the great ruler of realms, relying on a panting dog to keep toes from freezing. As the night deepens, you breathe out and see the fog of your own exhalation. Frost creeps across the corners of stained glass windows, tracing delicate veins of white. You tug at the curtain, peering outside. Snowflakes drift past, silent and endless, as if the whole world has decided to sleep. Inside, though, the castle is never truly quiet. Guards clank along the battlements, their boots echoing through stone, while servants shuffle logs to the hearth. All that noise is muffled, but it reminds you that royalty never truly slept alone. Your fingers brush the cold wood of the bed frame. Even here, where crowns gleam and banners hang, winter is an uninvited guest who never leaves. You realize how fragile comfort is, how sleep itself becomes a privilege guarded against stone, wind, and frost. And as you nestle deeper into this imagined bed, hearing the hum of wind beyond the curtains, you begin to understand that to be royal was not to escape hardship, but merely to endure it with better blankets. You shuffle closer to the shuttered wall, where the great stone blocks rise like frozen sentinels. At first glance, you might think such thickness would guarantee warmth, but the truth is the opposite. The stones act like icebergs, soaking in every ounce of cold and holding it hostage for months. You run your hand along the wall, and it is so chilled you half expect your skin to stick. The draft doesn't just seep in through the walls, though. It finds sly ways inside, through the narrow slits carved for archers, through gaps in wooden shutters, through the very mortar that binds the blocks. You glance at one of those arrow slits now. In the day, it's a clever defense, tall and narrow, allowing archers to shoot while staying protected. At night, in winter, it becomes a needle through which the wind stabs mercilessly. The shutters are bolted tight, but you can still hear a faint whistling, like a mournful flute. Each gust rattles the iron fittings, and every rattle makes you imagine lying awake, staring at the dark, waiting for warmth that never comes. Historians still argue whether medieval builders underestimated the power of drafts, or whether they simply accepted that castles were military machines first, homes second. Either way, the royal family had little choice but to endure. To counter these icy arrows of air, tapestries were hung thick across walls. You picture them now, massive woven scenes of hunts, saints, or mythical beasts. Their threads are vibrant in daylight, but at night their purpose is purely practical. They are shields of wool and silk, softening the echoes of the chamber while muting the drafts. Still, no tapestry can silence the persistent sigh of the winter wind. You lie back and imagine the sound, a constant low moan that seeps into dreams. Here's a solid historical fact. In many castles, including those of France and England, tapestries were not just decoration, they were insulation. Accounts from the 15th century show that monarchs spent enormous sums commissioning vast wall hangings, partly to impress visitors, partly to keep their teeth from chattering. Yet, a quirky detail remains. Some of these tapestries were moved from castle to castle as the monarch travelled, rolled up like enormous rugs, then hung again in each new hall. Imagine the servants groaning under the weight of that task. The shutters themselves deserve your attention. Made of oak or iron, they were built to withstand arrows and storms alike, yet they rarely sealed fully. You picture the monarch lying awake, hearing the subtle clink as the shutter shifts against the frame with every gust. You wonder, did queens ever ask their attendants to stuff wool into the cracks? There are scattered notes suggesting this, though no certainty. Scholars debate whether these little improvisations were common practice or just exceptional solutions. Even so, inside those heavy beds with their curtains drawn, the drafts could be momentarily defeated. You imagine lying within, hearing the wind shriek against the walls while feeling the cocoon of furs pull tight around your shoulders. The contrast is strange comfort nestled within hardship. The richer the monarch, the thicker the bedding, the more tapestries, the heavier the shutters. Yet the basic battle remained the same: the castle versus the cold, the monarch versus the draft. A fringe tidbit whispers here too. Some rulers ordered reeds or straw stuffed between stones in especially draughty chambers. It was a crude form of insulation, temporary and messy, but perhaps it helped. Imagine the embarrassment of the great king relying on bundles of straw jammed into his royal walls. Yet, desperation knows no rank. As the night deepens, you picture your own breath rising in the cold air, mingling with the sound of rattling shutters. Sleep would not come easily, even for a queen. You shift beneath the covers and realize that comfort in a medieval castle was never absolute. It was always negotiated, fragile, and hard-won. And every draught that slipped past those arrow slits was a reminder that no wall, however thick, could keep out the winter entirely. You turn your gaze toward the centerpiece of the chamber, the bed. It towers above the cold floor like a monument, carved with thick posts that rise toward the ceiling, each one polished by countless hands. This is not just a place to sleep, it is a statement of power. The royal bed is almost a room within a room, its curtains heavy enough to block light and trap warmth. You take a cautious step closer, the wooden boards beneath your feet creaking, and suddenly the vastness of the space feels less intimidating. Here, cocooned in wood and fabric, the monarch would face the night. Mainstream accounts tell us that medieval kings and queens often slept in four-poster beds so grand that servants needed steps to climb onto them. You picture this now, a mattress piled thick with layers, high enough that a child could vanish into its folds. The climb itself became part of the ritual, attendants steadying their monarch as they mounted the bed like one might mount a horse. What was luxury for the royals often became sheer spectacle for those watching. Look more closely. The mattress is not uniform like your modern one. Some are filled with feathers, some with wool, others layered with straw beneath softer stuffing. It's lumpy, uneven, but it is the best available. Wealth meant that instead of one thin layer, monarchs stacked many, turning the bed into a padded fortress. The result? You sink deeper into the folds, as though swallowed by the furniture itself. Yet comfort was subjective. Some kings reportedly preferred firmer straw-filled bases. Others demanded feather beds imported at absurd cost. Historians still argue whether personal taste or medical advice dictated these choices. After all, medieval doctors often claimed that certain materials balanced the body's humors. Then there is the frame itself. The posts are thick, carved with lions, fleur-de-lis, or religious motifs. These carvings were not mere decoration, they signaled piety, lineage, legitimacy. To lie in such a bed was not just to rest, but to embody authority. The bed was where treaties were whispered, heirs conceived, and sometimes where monarchs died. You realize suddenly that these towering frames carried more history than most thrones. A quirky detail emerges here. In some castles, the beds were so valuable they traveled with the monarch. Imagine the absurdity of an entourage carrying not just trunks of clothing but dismantled bed frames across muddy roads. The royal bed was portable power, reassembled in every residence like a symbol of continuity. It meant that no matter how foreign or drafty the chamber, the monarch would always sleep within the same familiar wooden walls. Step closer still. The curtains hanging from the canopy are thick, woven from wool, silk, or velvet, dyed in colors reserved for the elite. You brush the fabric and feel its weight, heavy enough to silence whispers and shut out candlelight. They're drawn tight against drafts, sealing the royal body within a microclimate of warmth and scent. Musty fabric, faint smoke, the lingering perfume of oils rubbed into the wood. Inside this cocoon, the king or queen could forget, if only briefly, the frost outside. But even here, inconveniences lingered. Without springs, the bed sagged where the ropes stretched loose. Servants had to tighten the bed by pulling the ropes taut beneath the mattress, giving us the phrase, "sleep tight." You smile at that. A modern comfort phrase rooted in the grunt work of servants trying to keep their monarch's spines straight through the night. You pause to consider how surreal it must have felt. A monarch who commands armies and kingdoms lying down like a child, dependent on attendants to fluff pillows, arrange furs, and chase away drafts. Historians still debate whether this nightly vulnerability contributed to the elaborate rituals of bedchambers, the processions, the prayers. The attendants meant as much to protect dignity as to provide comfort. And so you imagine yourself lying here, the curtains closing around you, the posts standing like sentries. Outside, the castle groans under winter's assault. Inside, you are wrapped in authority, tradition, and the uneven lumps of an oversized mattress. It is grand, Yes, but also oddly human. For even kings and queens, in the end, had to wrestle with the simple question, will this bed keep me warm tonight? You lower yourself onto the bed now, and it almost swallows you whole. What strikes you first is not softness, but weight. The bedding presses down like layers of history themselves. One quilt, then another, then furs stacked so high, you wonder if you'll suffocate before you ever feel warm. The sensation is comforting and oppressive at once, a heavy embrace meant to pin you against the cold. The monarch lying here would sink under the burden, but perhaps that was the point. Immobility meant warmth. A straightforward fact comes to mind. Inventories from castles such as Hampton Court list as many as 7 or 8 coverings on a single royal bed in winter. That included feather mattresses, woolen blankets, fur throws, and sometimes even silken quilts imported from Italy. The abundance was a symbol of wealth, but also a practical shield against frost. And then the quirky details. Have you heard of squirrel fur? It was called vair, a luxury material sewn into patchwork linings of cloaks and bedding. Each piece came from the animal's belly, pale blue-grey, stitched into a shimmering mosaic. You might picture Cinderella's glass slipper, but originally her slipper in the old tale was made of vair, a fur so precious it glittered in candlelight. Imagine kings and queens lying beneath layers of squirrel bellies, just to keep their toes from freezing. Not quite the fairy tale, is it? You reach down and feel how uneven the bedding becomes. Wool blankets scratch your skin, while silken covers slide away with the slightest movement. The furs smell faintly of musk, the odor of animals lingering no matter how carefully they are treated. You wrinkle your nose, realizing that luxury was rarely clean. Historians still debate whether bedding was washed often or only replaced, for the risk of soaking wool and fur in water might ruin it. Some argue that perfumed sachets and herbs tucked between the layers served more to mask the odor than to freshen the cloth. Servants would spend long moments preparing these layers. They fluffed the feather beds, shook out the quilts, smoothed the linens, and laid each fur precisely so the seams did not overlap. You imagine them working quickly, their breath puffing in the icy chamber as they rushed to finish before the monarch entered. The bed became less an object of rest than a stage, set carefully for the nightly drama of sleep. Now you tuck yourself under the covers. The first blanket is scratchy, the next heavy, the third softer but slippery, the fourth almost suffocating. By the time the furs are pulled atop you, you're trapped in a sandwich of cloth and pelt. Your body heat begins to build a fragile bubble, and the cold fades just enough for drowsiness to creep in. You think about how peasants at the same time were huddling on straw pallets by smoky hearths, and suddenly, this mountain of blankets feels almost divine. Yet still, the cold seeps through. A draught brushes your cheek, a reminder that no number of blankets could erase the stone's chill. So the monarch clung tighter, pulling the covers up, burying nose and chin in fur, trying to vanish into warmth. Perhaps you've done the same on a winter's night, buried so deep you leave only a breathing hole. The royal experience, for all its pomp, was not so different. One last thought as you drift within these layers. Some monarchs were rumored to sleep almost sitting up, propped against pillows. Scholars argue whether this was medical advice, thought to ease digestion and protect against bad humors, or simply a necessity, since sliding flat beneath such heavy bedding could feel suffocating. Either way, you picture a king leaning upright, his crown set aside, chin on his chest, buried beneath squirrels and silk. Power never looked so bundled. You lie there, bundled beneath mountains of bedding, when you notice another detail of the royal night, what the monarch is actually wearing to bed. Forget your idea of thin cotton pajamas or a t-shirt. A king or queen of the Middle Ages stepped into bed, clad like someone preparing for a drafty vigil. Long linen shirts, heavy nightgowns, and fur-lined caps were the norm. You run your fingers over the imagined fabric. It is coarse against the skin, the weave loose but sturdy. The warmth it offers is uneven, but better than nothing. A plain historical fact. In the 15th century, nobles wore nightshirts made from linen or even silk if wealth allowed. These were not simple garments. Some were embroidered, some edged with lace, because even in the privacy of the chamber, appearances mattered. The queen's attendants might see her disrobe, and even in her sleep she was meant to embody dignity. Now for something more curious, fur-lined nightcaps. These odd little hats, sometimes ridiculed in later centuries, were essential in drafty castles. Heat escapes from the head, and so monarchs pulled on caps with flaps covering their ears, like medieval winter helmets for slumber. Imagine Henry VIII, famous for his swagger, settling into bed with a snug little cap pulled down tight. It is an image both comic and human. The layering was more than comfort. It was believed to protect health. Medical theory of the time warned against cold air entering the body through the pores while one slept. To be uncovered was considered dangerous. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in real experiences of chill-induced illness, or if it was simply humoral theory shaping practice. Either way, the royal wardrobe at night was a direct defense against both drafts and disease. Feel the linen shift as you adjust. It clings slightly with sweat, for the air is cold but the bedding oppressive. Woolen socks, perhaps even leather slippers, complete the ensemble. Yes, shoes in bed. Not the soft slippers you might imagine, but house shoes, to keep feet warm on the icy rush mats when rising briefly in the night. It sounds absurd until you recall the stone floors bite hard enough to make you yelp at a single barefoot step. Here comes a fringe tidbit. Some monarchs, especially in northern courts, supposedly had special fur mittens for sleep. It's difficult to know how widespread this was, but a few scattered references mention it. Picture the royal hands, usually raised in benediction or signing decrees, now tucked in fuzzy gloves as though preparing for a snowball fight in dreams. And yet, even with all this, you can imagine the discomfort. The nightshirt itches, the socks twist at the ankle, the cap slips, leaving one ear freezing. But without these things, the cold would creep in until sleep was impossible. So the monarch tolerated the annoyance, trading elegance for survival. The chamber grows quieter as the hour deepens. Outside, the wind sighs against shutters. Inside, the monarch shifts under layers, dressed almost as if to travel, never fully vulnerable, never truly free of winter's grip. You realize now that royalty did not sleep like the portraits suggest, naked, at ease, in soft beds. They slept armored against cold, draped in furs, heads capped, feet wrapped, bodies stiff in their heavy linens. Their crowns may have rested on tables, but the weight of winter remained upon them all night long. The heavy curtains fall into place, and suddenly the cavernous chamber feels like a tent pitched inside a cathedral. You are surrounded not just by fabric but by strategy. Every detail of this enclosure has a purpose: to trap warmth, to soften sound, and to shield a monarch from the biting cold that creeps relentlessly through the castle's walls. When you run your hand along the inner lining, you notice how thick it is, velvet layered over wool, sometimes even quilted with additional padding. It smells faintly of dye, beeswax, and human breath, a mixture that tells you this fabric has worked hard through many winters. Descriptions from the 15th and 16th centuries mention these bed hangings as essential rather than ornamental. In fact, accounts from Burgundy describe whole sets of curtains that cost more than the furniture they enclosed. They were drawn tightly at night, fastened with cords or weighted hems so that the wind could not stir them. Within, the monarch slept inside what was effectively a microclimate. Cold might rule outside the curtains, but inside, heat gathered from bodies, candles, and even the slow smoulder of a brazier. One peculiar detail comes to light. Some sets of hangings were decorated with scenes of gardens or summer hunts. Imagine lying inside, shivering beneath furs, yet surrounded visually by woven flowers, deer, and sunlight. It was a psychological trick as much as decoration, a reminder of warmth in the dead of winter. The imagery may have offered comfort, or perhaps irony. depending on your mood at 3 in the morning. Experts disagree on how effective these curtains truly were. Some believe the thick folds could raise the temperature by several degrees, turning an unlivable stone vault into a tolerable cocoon. Others argue that they merely prevented direct drafts, but left the air inside stuffy, heavy with smoke and sweat. You can almost test it yourself. Breathe deeply within this enclosed space. The air is warmer, yes, but it clings to your throat, a mixture of moisture and fabric dust. Servants had their roles here too. Before the monarch entered, attendants checked every tie, smoothed each fold, and ensured the canopy was secured. Imagine their nervousness if the king woke in the night complaining of a fluttering curtain. Someone's career might hang by a thread. Curtains could even serve a political function, for they gave privacy. A ruler could conduct whispered conversations, receive a favored companion, or shield an illness from curious eyes. The curtain was not just cloth, it was a barrier of power. An unusual practice noted in some courts was the use of perfumed sachets tucked into the folds. Lavender, rose petals, or dried herbs mingled with the heavy smell of wool and velvet. The result was a strange cocktail of aromas, half apothecary, half barnyard, half chapel. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but to a medieval sleeper, it was reassurance. Fragrance carried both spiritual and medical significance, believed to ward off disease carried by the night air. Now imagine lying back with the curtains fully closed. The chamber beyond vanishes, the draughty windows, the cold stone floor, the echo of guards' boots all disappear. Instead, you hear only your own breathing muffled by cloth. The flicker of candles dims into a soft glow, like stars seen through fog. The sense of enclosure is complete. You are in your own world, a fragile sanctuary stitched together with thread. And yet, comfort was never absolute. The fabric absorbed moisture from the breath of sleepers, from spilled wine, from the very frost that condensed on its outer layer. Over time, hangings grew musty and heavy. Some were replaced often, others mended and reused for decades. There are records of monarchs passing down bed curtains as valuable heirlooms. The thought may amuse you, crowns of gold are one thing, but a set of smelly old curtains as a royal treasure? Yet that was the reality of wealth in a world where warmth equaled survival. Contemporary inventories suggest that multiple sets of hangings travelled with the royal household, rolled carefully into trunks. One winter might call for the thick velvet set, another for the lighter silk embroidered with hunting scenes. It was a wardrobe for the bed itself, as changeable as a king's attire. This mobility reminds you how central the bed was. Wherever the monarch went, the curtains followed, ready to transform any stone room into a recognizable nest. You may pause now and imagine yourself pulling those curtains shut. They swish with a low, heavy sound, sealing you away from the world. You settle back, layers pressing against your chest, cap snug on your head, socks warming your toes. The wind hammers against shutters outside, but within this fabric cave, you feel almost safe. Almost. Because no matter how rich the curtains, no matter how thick the furs, the cold remains a constant presence, pressing at the edges, reminding you that winter always finds a way in. It is a paradox you cannot escape. The grandeur of the setting versus the fragility of the comfort. A king might sleep beneath velvet embroidered with gold, yet wake in the night to see his breath cloud the air. A queen might rest amid silks dyed in rare crimson, yet shiver under her layers. Luxury did not defeat the cold, it only negotiated with it, buying a few hours of uneasy warmth. As you drift deeper into this image, your thoughts grow slower, like the embers in a brazier dimming to red. The curtains sway slightly, stirred by the faintest breeze, and you realize how thin the line is between royal splendor and simple survival. To be monarch in winter was to live within contradictions, clothed in power yet vulnerable to drafts, wrapped in silk yet still trembling in the dark. And so you close your eyes, cocooned in velvet, listening to the muted world outside, knowing that even kings and queens must make peace with the cold before sleep will come. The glow of fire catches your eye. Across the chamber, a hearth smoulders with stubborn determination, its flames licking upward before collapsing into embers. You walk toward it, but the warmth seems shy, hesitant to leave its circle. By the time you've crossed half the room, the chill reclaims you. Fireplaces in castles were enormous grand, with hoods carved from stone and mantels heavy with ornament, yet their heat rarely matched their appearance. They roared brightly when first stoked, then sulked, leaving vast halls as cold as caves. From household accounts, we know that servants fed these fires constantly in winter, dragging logs as thick as your arm through endless corridors. The cost of fuel was staggering. Records from Scottish castles mention entire forests being stripped for firewood during particularly harsh winters. The paradox is clear. Kings could command armies, but they could never command fire to heat stone evenly. A curious custom emerges here. Sometimes braziers, portable metal bowls filled with hot coals, were placed near the bed. These iron containers radiated warmth like miniature suns. You can almost see them now, glowing orange, smoke wafting upward in lazy curls. But imagine sleeping next to one. Sparks might spit, the air thickened with ash, and should the coals fall, fire could consume hangings and blankets before anyone woke. It was both comfort and danger, glowing too close for peace of mind. Researchers remain divided on how effective these heating methods truly were. Some argue that the combination of a fireplace and multiple braziers could lift the temperature enough to make a room bearable. Others counter that most of the heat escaped into the high ceilings, leaving sleepers as cold as before. You lean close to the flames now, your skin tingling, but step back only a few paces, and the frost returns, quick as a predator reclaiming its ground. One overlooked detail reveals itself in the smell. Fires fueled by tallow or peat gave off acrid smoke, clinging to curtains, tapestries, and clothes. Imagine the royal garments perfumed not by roses but by smouldering fuel. Some monarchs preferred fragrant woods like cedar or juniper, imported at great cost, partly for the scent, partly for the prestige. To burn cedar in a hearth was to announce that you were wealthy enough to perfume the air with every flicker. Another eccentric note servant sometimes placed heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth beneath the bedding before the monarch retired. You picture attendants hustling with tongs, slipping warm bricks under the sheets like hidden coals. The comfort lasted only briefly, fading as the night deepened, but that first contact with warmth must have felt like heaven. Now you linger near the fire, listening to it pop and sigh. The flames cast shadows that dance across the stone walls, shifting giants in the dimness. The king or queen, lying beneath curtains, would see those shapes flicker faintly and hear the crackle as part of their nightly lullaby. Was it comforting, or did it stir unease, as if the chamber itself were restless? Accounts never say, and perhaps the answer depended on mood, on health, or on whether the fire felt protective or menacing that night. Picture yourself lying back in bed, hearing servants enter softly to feed the fire at intervals. The scrape of iron tools against logs, the hush of footsteps, the muffled thud of fresh wood. Even sleep was never private. Warmth demanded company. The monarch dozed while others labored, a constant reminder that survival in winter was communal, even for royalty. And still, the cold lingered. The flames did their best, but by morning frost rimmed the windows, tapestries hung stiff with damp, and the breath of sleepers clouded the air. Fire was a guest in the chamber, not a ruler. It gave what comfort it could, then surrendered to the stone. You lean back now, watching the embers dim. The glow fades, shadows stretch longer, and the chill creeps closer, eager to reclaim its throne. In that moment, you realize that even kings and queens wrapped in furs, surrounded by braziers, their fires tended by servants through the night, never fully conquered winter. They merely postponed it until dawn. The fire dies down, leaving the chamber in dim half-light, and you notice a new presence, the scent of tallow. Candles stand in clusters on iron stands, their flames trembling whenever the wind sneaks through a crack. They give just enough light to read a prayer book, or glimpse the embroidered canopy overhead, but never enough to chase away the shadows. And the smell, thick, waxy, almost greasy, clings to your nose and throat. Tallow was made from animal fat, and once lit, it filled the room with a pungency that mingled with smoke from the hearth. Contemporary descriptions remind us that while beeswax candles existed, they were costly luxuries reserved for grand feasts or church services. In the bedchamber, monarchs often relied on cheaper tallow unless ceremony demanded splendor. Imagine a queen drifting off to sleep, her last vision not golden brilliance but the stubby glow of smoky tapers. Even in palaces, economy crept into the night. One odd practice reveals itself in the flicker. Wicks sometimes hissed or sputtered, scattering tiny sparks of fat. Attendants had to trim them regularly with scissor-like tools called snuffers. You picture a servant leaning over the king's bed at midnight, clipping a wick while trying not to wake him. The room would briefly darken, then brighten again with steadier flame. It was a small choreography repeated endlessly, proof that even sleep demanded maintenance. Specialists still disagree about how much light a monarch truly wanted while sleeping. Some argue they preferred near-total darkness, for excess flame consumed oxygen in enclosed curtains. Others suggest that faint candlelight was left burning for reassurance, to keep away fears of thieves, spirits, or sudden illness. You lean back now and watch the shadows sway, half comforting, half menacing, their shapes transforming into faces if you stare too long. Among the stranger details recorded is the use of perfumed candles. Certain courts experimented with wax infused with herbs or spices, meant to sweeten the air. Imagine cinnamon drifting through a frigid chamber, or rose-scented smoke curling against cold stone. The effect might have been pleasant at first, but the mingling of perfume with tallow's greasy base must have been less enchanting, a clash between luxury and reality. The light itself changed the psychology of the night. Candles burned low, their flames sinking as hours passed, marking time in a way clocks could not. The slow guttering of wax was like a heartbeat for the room. You see it now. The candle bends, wax pooling, flame shrinking until it gasps and dies. Darkness rushes in, thick and absolute, broken only by the faint orange eye of the brazier. How unsettling must that have been, to wake at 3 a.m. to find half your chamber vanished into shadow. And the danger candles near curtains posed constant risk. Many fires in castles began from careless flames brushing against fabric. Servants had to be vigilant, shifting holders further from hangings, extinguishing wicks before sleep deepened. Even royalty feared fire, for stone walls might stand, but the tapestries, furs, and very bedding that kept them warm were tinder waiting for a spark. Imagine yourself now, lying beneath heavy covers, the curtain drawn. Beyond the cloth, the faint glow of candles flickers. You smell fat and smoke, hear the occasional hiss. The flame sways when a draught slips in, then steadies again, like a companion breathing beside you. It is both comfort and menace, both warmth and warning. You realize that light in the medieval night was never casual. It was fragile, costly, and dangerous, a luxury balanced on a wick. In this wavering half-dark, kings and queens drifted into dreams, knowing that each candle consumed wealth with every inch of wick. Sleep came not in silence, but in the rhythm of fire and fat, the glow of necessity dressed as luxury. And when the final taper died, only cold and darkness remained. The chamber is quiet now, save for the rustle of footsteps you almost didn't hear. A servant approaches the royal bed with practiced care, carrying a long-handled pan of glowing embers. The metal creaks as it cools against the winter air. This, you realize, is not for cooking but for comfort. The warming pan, an invention both ingenious and risky, was slipped between sheets before the monarch lay down. The pan's lid rattles softly, and a faint smell of scorched linen drifts up where a careless touch came too close. From surviving household accounts, We know that warming pans and heated bricks were common in noble households by the late Middle Ages. Servants filled them with coals, then hurried to the bed before the embers lost their heat. The goal was simple: banish the shock of icy sheets. Imagine the relief of sliding beneath covers pre-warmed by glowing metal. For a king or queen, that brief moment of luxury must have felt priceless, worth all the wood cut and coal burned to supply it. Yet one eccentric twist: surfaces, warming pans occasionally left singe marks or even small fires. There are reports of scorched bedding, of smoke-filling chambers, of attendants punished for clumsiness. You picture the panic of a servant realizing he had nearly set the royal bed alight, and the cold sweat that must have rivaled the winter chill. Comfort and catastrophe were separated by only a thin sheet of linen. Scholarly opinion is divided on how widespread such devices truly were among the highest elite. Some believe every winter night in a palace saw a parade of warming pans. Others think they were reserved for the harshest weather, too laborious to prepare daily. What seems certain is that portable heat was cherished wherever it appeared, for castles were relentless in their refusal to warm evenly. And there was another, more intimate method. Servants themselves became living warmers. Attendants sometimes climbed into bed moments before the monarch, using their own body heat to soften the sting of frozen linens. The practice might seem humiliating now, but in the context of survival, it was practical. A living furnace, dismissed before the ruler settled in. Oddly enough, in some courts, favored companions or noble guests might also share the bed, less for romance and more for warmth. The royal body was rarely alone in its nightly struggle against the cold. Picture it. The queen enters her chamber, dismisses most of her attendants, but two remain. They lift the heavy hangings, fan warm air inside, and scurry away after making sure the bed is tolerable. She slides beneath the covers, not greeted by an icy shock, but by the fading warmth of a heated pan, or perhaps a servant's own imprint. The relief must have been immense, though temporary. Within an hour, the cold seeped back in, demanding more layers, more closeness, more endurance. One peculiar anecdote even suggests that certain monarchs had favorite servants known for preparing beds to just the right warmth, prized not for loyalty or wit but for their skill with glowing coals. Imagine your career depending on whether the king's feet felt pleasantly toasty. It is both absurd and strangely human, a reminder that power rested on small comforts as much as on armies. You draw the curtains around you now, closing off the view of the servant retreating with the empty pan. The smell of smoke lingers faintly in the fabric. You shift under the covers, grateful for a pocket of warmth that will soon fade, leaving you to wrestle with the cold once more. Even kings and queens, wrapped in silks and squirrel fur, relied on glowing pans and nervous attendants to soothe them into sleep. Wealth did not eliminate the chill. It only brought brief reprieves. And as you close your eyes, you realize that in this world of stone and frost, survival was always stitched together by fragile measures: coals in a pan, hands arranging furs, curtains pulled tight. Royalty did not command the cold. They bargained with it, night after night. You shift under the weight of quilts and hear faint movement nearby. The bed is not a solitary refuge tonight, it is shared. For us, the idea of privacy in sleep feels natural, but in the Middle Ages, beds were places of politics as much as rest. Monarchs often shared them, not just with their spouses but with nobles, attendants, or even foreign guests. Heat was one reason more bodies meant more warmth, but the practice also spoke to status and trust. To be invited beneath the royal canopy was to be marked as intimate, favored, and indispensable. Evidence from chronicles tells us that important visitors sometimes slept in the same chamber, even in the same bed, as their host monarch. This was not considered scandalous. Rather, it was a ritual of bonding. Sharing blankets forged alliances as effectively as signed treaties. Imagine two kings lying side by side, speaking softly as embers glow, their words weaving agreements more binding than parchment. The intimacy of the bedchamber became a political theatre. One curious account describes Edward II of England sleeping with his favourites, not in secrecy but openly, under the gaze of his court. Whether for companionship, warmth, or trust, the royal bed was rarely just a place to close one's eyes. It was a symbol of connection. Oddly enough, even queens sometimes slept with ladies in waiting pressed close, both to share heat and to preserve a sense of security in the vast, echoing chambers. Historians continue to question how common this practice was across different courts. Some argue it was routine, others suggest it was situational, reserved for journeys, negotiations, or bitterly cold seasons, when survival trumped etiquette. But it's clear that the solitude we take for granted was rare for royalty. Their every breath was witnessed, their every turn in bed noted. Sleep was a communal act, wrapped in layers of hierarchy. There were lighter customs too. In some courts, dogs nestled into the bedding as additional companions. Small lapdogs warmed feet, while larger hunting hounds stretched across the lower covers. You can almost feel the weight of a drowsy dog pinning down the quilts, its warmth seeping into frozen toes. A monarch who commanded castles and armies also relied on the simple body heat of animals, a scene both humbling and endearing. Imagine the sounds of such a night: a queen sighing softly, a lady in waiting murmuring a prayer, a dog shifting, claws clicking against wood. The great bed creaks with each movement, but the curtains mute the noise, creating a world within a world. You lie there, listening, aware of the closeness of others, comforted and perhaps constrained by their presence. There is safety in numbers, but also unease. Does everyone truly sleep? Or do some lie awake, watching, listening? One lesser-known detail hints that bed-sharing also guarded against assassination. In turbulent courts, monarchs surrounded themselves with loyal companions at night. The logic was simple. No attacker could reach the king without stepping over witnesses. Warmth, politics, and security, three reasons stitched into the same quilt. Yet you wonder how restful such sleep could ever be. The royal bed, then, was more than furniture. It was a stage for alliances, a fortress against cold, a nest of both trust and suspicion. You tuck yourself deeper beneath the layers, feeling imagined bodies close on either side. The chamber outside may be frozen, but here, pressed shoulder to shoulder, you sense a fragile warmth. It is not private, it is not entirely comfortable, but in a medieval castle, during the longest winters, this closeness was survival itself. The curtains close again, and with them comes the peculiar orchestra of the medieval night. At first you think it will be silence, but the chamber quickly proves you wrong. Every sound seems magnified in the stillness: wind howling through arrow slits, wood popping in the hearth, distant bells tolling from a chapel tower. A monarch lying awake would have known these noises as constant companions, their rhythm as familiar as the beating of a heart. Contemporary observers note that the wind was often the loudest voice in the castle. It wailed through cracks, groaned along battlements, and rattled shutters. Imagine lying in the dark, listening to gusts rise and fall like a living thing circling the walls. Some likened it to spirits or the voices of saints whispering warnings. Others simply cursed it for keeping them awake. Even today, historians cannot say with certainty how much insulation, tapestries, and shutters provided only that people wrote about the noise as often as the cold. And then came the footsteps. Guards patrolled the corridors through the night, their boots striking stone in steady cadence. You hear them now, echoes that start faint, grow closer, then fade again into distance. For a monarch, that rhythm could be reassurance or reminder. Reassurance that watchmen guarded their life. Reminder that danger always lurked, requiring vigilance even at midnight. Some rulers insisted on extra patrols during winter, when snow muffled approaches and made attacks easier. Security, like warmth, was never guaranteed. One eccentric note survives in reports of night watch songs. Certain guards were required to call out the hour and chant brief prayers as they patrolled. Imagine the strange mix: deep voices breaking the silence with cries of "Midnight, all is well," or verses of psalms, drifting through corridors into the royal bedchamber. For some monarchs, these chants were comforting. For others, they were irritation in a night already filled with noise. Closer still, the castle's own creatures added their part. Dogs growled softly from the hall, keeping uneasy watch. Owls screeched from the rafters. In some records, even rats are mentioned scurrying across rush-covered floors, audible in the hush of the small hours. You pull your covers tighter at the thought, realizing that royal blood did not exempt anyone from sharing space with pests. The bed curtains helped block sight, but not always sound. Debate continues among researchers about whether such a cacophony hindered or aided sleep. Some suggest medieval people were more accustomed to noise, finding comfort in familiar sounds. Others argue that insomnia was common, worsened by drafts and disturbances. Diaries and chronicles record both some nights slept through heavily, others spent restless and watchful. Now close your eyes and listen. The room breathes with layered sound, the hiss of wind, the creak of timber beams, the crack of cooling stone. A servant coughs faintly in the adjoining chamber. Somewhere, a hinge squeals. It is not silence, but a collage of noises that remind you of life beyond the bed curtains. A king or queen never slept alone, not truly. Even in stillness, the castle itself whispered and groaned, as if it too were alive, dreaming in the cold. You curl deeper beneath the quilts, but your mind drifts toward another discomfort: cleanliness, or the lack of it. The royal bedchamber might look splendid with its gilded hangings and carved posts, but when it came to hygiene, even kings and queens could not escape the realities of medieval life. Linen sheets, yes, but washed less often than you might hope. Furs and quilts rarely saw soap and water at all, for washing could ruin their texture. Instead, perfumes, herbs and powders masked odors until the staleness became part of the room's identity. Household accounts tell us that sheets were sometimes changed weekly in the wealthiest courts, though in harsher winters the frequency dropped laundering meant hauling water, breaking ice, and drying heavy cloth by smoky fires. Too much trouble when snow piled high. A king could command armies, but not the laws of nature. A peculiar practice surfaces in some records. Sprigs of rosemary or lavender were tucked into bedding to discourage lice and fleas. You imagine lying down and brushing against brittle herbs crackling beneath the sheets. The scent might soothe, or it might scratch, but the purpose was always practical. Insects thrived in the warmth of layered bedding, and keeping them at bay was an endless struggle. The royal body, for all its authority, was just as appetizing to pests as any peasants. Scholars have long debated how much of a problem vermin truly were in royal households. Some argue that constant laundering by armies of servants kept infestations at bay. Others insist that even in the grandest castles, lice and bedbugs were unavoidable companions. A few suggest that the heavy use of herbs and perfumes in royal inventories is itself evidence of a losing battle against crawling discomfort. One detail, almost comical in its honesty, comes from letters describing monarchs complaining of restless nights caused by sheets too dirty or bedding too damp. Imagine the ruler of half of Europe scratching at flea bites in the dark, muttering curses as the wind howled outside. Wealth, in that moment, must have felt hollow indeed. And then there was the matter of chamber pots. Stored discreetly near the bed or behind a screen, they brought relief without leaving the warm cocoon of curtains. Yet the odour lingered, mingling with tallow smoke and damp wool. Servants emptied them each morning, but through the night the smell hovered like an unwelcome guest. To modern sensibilities, the thought is unpleasant, but in a world without plumbing, it was simple necessity. Consider too the floor coverings, rushes strewn with herbs, replaced only a few times a year. In winter they trapped soot, spilled wine, and food crumbs, offering both insulation and a thriving ecosystem for insects and rodents. The air of the royal chamber was not pristine. It was a blend of cold draughts and earthy smells, softened only by incense burned at prayer times. You lie there now, imagining the scratch of linen not freshly laundered, the weight of furs with their musky scent, the faint crackle of rosemary under your hand. Sleep was possible, yes, but it came with compromise. Cleanliness was relative, comfort never absolute. Kings and queens may have ruled realms, but when they closed their eyes at night, they surrendered to the same irritations faced by all itching, odours, and the occasional scuttle of unseen legs in the dark. The heaviness of the bed, the smell of smoke and herbs, all blur together as your thoughts wander toward the evening meal that preceded this uneasy sleep. For royals, bedtime did not come on an empty stomach. Winter nights often followed, grand feasts held in draughty halls below, where torches flickered, and minstrels played as platters groaned under roasted meats. Imagine trudging up the stone stairs afterward, belly full of venison, boar, or swan, perhaps washed down with spiced wine. You lie back in bed now and feel that fullness pressing against your ribs. Sleep, under such conditions, was not always restful. Inventories and banquet accounts reveal the richness of these meals. Medieval kings and queens dined heavily on roasted fowl, bread thick with butter, and stews swimming in exotic spices imported at enormous cost. Even in winter, their tables dazzled with preserved fruits, candied nuts, and wine mulled with cinnamon or cloves. What you ate before sleep shaped your dreams, and a monarch's dreams were often flavored by indulgence. A curious detail surfaces here. Physicians frequently advised against overeating at night, warning that it produced nightmares or disturbed humors. Yet monarchs, ever human, ignored such counsel. After hours of feasting, they carried that indulgence with them into bed. Some chroniclers even hint that certain kings complained of indigestion and night sweats, ailments made worse by the heavy bedding piled upon them. Picture the irony: powerful rulers laid low by their own supper. Modern scholars continue to puzzle over the role of food in shaping medieval sleep. Did the combination of heavy meats, rich wines, and cold chambers produce more restless nights than restful ones? Or were royal bodies simply more accustomed to such fare? The evidence is thin, scattered among medical treatises and diary notes, leaving us to imagine how a stomach churning with venison stew might mingle with the howl of the wind to create strange, unsettling dreams. The drink, too, played its part. Spiced wine or ale was thought to warm the body against winter chill. You can almost feel it now, heat spreading through your chest, only to fade as the cold presses back in. For a brief while, alcohol dulled the discomfort, but it also blurred the edge between waking and sleeping. Dreams took on vivid, sometimes bizarre colors under its influence. There are whispers in chronicles of monarchs reporting visions after feasts, interpreted as divine omens or warnings, though perhaps they were nothing more than the echoes of too much drink. One eccentric practice at certain courts was the consumption of possets, a mixture of hot milk, ale, and spices taken just before bed. Thick, cloying, and warm, it was intended as a soporific. Imagine sipping such a potion in a frigid room, then sinking under quilts, drowsy but unsettled. The richness of the concoction must have weighed heavily on the stomach, perhaps soothing, perhaps troubling. You picture it now, the king adjusting his fur cap, the queen sinking into pillows, both heavy with food and wine. Their chamber is not silent, their bodies are not light. Beneath the curtains, sleep comes slowly, thick as syrup. Outside, the castle moans with the wind. Inside, dreams stir, shaped by feasts that fill the belly but never silence the cold. And so you realize that royal nights were never entirely restful. Comfort was always layered with discomfort, warmth with draught, luxury with unease, fullness with indigestion. The banquet might have been splendid, but the price was often paid in restless slumber, punctuated by turning bodies and muffled sighs in the dark. The night stretches on, and before sleep takes hold, ritual presses in. A monarch did not simply tumble into bed. The act of retiring was layered with ceremony, shaped by faith, fear, and formality. You hear it now, the soft murmur of attendants reciting prayers as they help the king or queen out of heavy robes and into linen. The flicker of candles grows gentler, incense curls into the air, and the chamber shifts from public to sacred. Royal chaplains often played a role at bedtime. Records describe priests or confessors present in the chamber, offering blessings before the monarch closed their eyes. The words were not elaborate, but they were weighty, pleas for protection against the dangers of the night. For in medieval thought, darkness was not just absence of light, it was a realm of demons, thieves, and illness. Lying down to sleep meant surrendering to forces beyond control. A whispered Pater Noster, or Ave Maria, was armor as vital as blankets and curtains. One detail found in household ordinances is the requirement for candles to burn before icons or crucifixes while the monarch slept. Imagine that faint golden glow falling across painted saints, their eyes watching through the night, comforting to some, unsettling to others. You can almost feel their gaze in the darkness, a reminder that even kings and queens lay humbled beneath higher powers. An intriguing habit appears in some chronicles. Monarchs traced the sign of the cross on their pillows before resting their heads. Others sprinkled holy water on the bed curtains. These gestures may sound quaint, but in their minds they offered genuine protection against sudden death, nightmares, or evil spirits. Scholars remain uncertain whether these rituals were universal or more personal quirks of piety, but the pattern is clear: religion seeped into the very fabric of sleep. There were practical elements too. Prayers often included requests for health and fertility. A queen, anxious to bear an heir, might fall asleep repeating invocations to saints associated with childbirth. A king, facing war, might dream of victory after murmuring a psalm. The night was not just rest, it was preparation for the burdens of the day to come. One curious practice recorded in France involved reciting portions of the Book of Hours aloud, even in bed, until drowsiness overtook the speaker. Imagine lying under heavy quilts, lips moving softly, words of devotion blending with the crackle of the hearth until they drifted into murmurs of sleep. The rhythm of prayer itself became a lullaby. Researchers today continue to ask whether these nightly rituals genuinely calmed monarchs, or simply reflected a culture of fear. Were the prayers heartfelt, or merely duty performed before the eyes of attendants? We cannot know. What is certain is that sleep, for them, was never entirely private. Faith accompanied them into the bedchamber as surely as fur or fire. Now, close your own eyes for a moment and picture it. The monarch lies back, head sinking into embroidered pillows. A servant kneels at the foot of the bed, reciting a final blessing. The curtains sway as someone closes them tight, sealing in both warmth and whispered prayers. Outside, the wind moans. Inside, the night has been consecrated with ritual. Sleep, when it comes, will not be just physical, it will be spiritual, guarded by words murmured into the dark. The fire fades low, the prayers drift into silence, and yet the night remains restless. In these hours, shadows seem to shift with intention. You imagine lying beneath the heavy curtains, hearing the wind claw at shutters, and wondering if something unseen lurks in the darkness. For monarchs, superstition clung to every breath of night air. Winter was not only cold, it was haunted. Chroniclers mention that many nobles feared night spirits or demons who prowled the dark. Dreams were considered thresholds through which such beings might slip. To sleep was to lower one's guard, and so charms, prayers, and relics were kept close. A queen might tuck a saint's medal under her pillow. A king might sleep with a holy relic at his bedside. These talismans were not trinkets, they were shields against the unknown. There's a curious report of charms sewn directly into bed curtains, stitched with protective symbols. Imagine tracing those secret threads in the fabric as you drifted off, trusting them to hold evil at bay. Such practices blur the line between faith and folklore, between church ritual and whispered superstition. Historians remain divided over how widespread these beliefs were among elites, but hints appear again and again in court accounts. One eccentric detail survives in tales of monarchs keeping protective animals near their chamber. Cats, for instance, were believed by some to sense spirits and ward off misfortune. Whether these animals truly roamed the royal bedchamber is uncertain, but the notion lingers, furry guardians against things that moved unseen. Dogs, already serving as warm footrests, may also have doubled as sentinels against spectral fears. And the dreams, oh, the dreams. Heavy feasts, spiced wine, and smoky air combined to produce visions vivid and strange. A nightmare was never just a nightmare. It could be a prophecy or a warning. You picture the monarch waking suddenly, heart racing, the echo of some ghastly image still clinging to the mind. Attendants might rush to soothe, to offer holy water, to remind the ruler that evil could not breach the sacred curtains. Yet the fear remained, a cold more biting than frost. Debates continue among modern researchers about how literally medieval monarchs believed in these night terrors. Some argue they were deeply superstitious, clinging to charms with genuine dread. Others believe the rituals were more symbolic, outward shows of devotion, while inwardly rulers wrestled with anxieties rooted in politics and responsibility. Perhaps both were true. Power invites paranoia, and the night gave those fears room to grow. Now imagine yourself lying there, trying to surrender to sleep, but listening for sounds beyond the curtain. Every creak in the timber feels ominous. Every gust of wind becomes a whisper. The castle itself seems alive, restless. You clutch your covers tighter, not just against the cold, but against the weight of fear. For if you were a medieval monarch, you were not only guardian of a realm, you were a vulnerable soul in a world where darkness held meaning, danger, and mystery. And so, night after night, kings and queens endured this blend of faith and fear, warmth and chill, ritual and unease. The cold was one enemy, but the imagination was another. Wrapped in furs, scented with herbs, guarded by relics, they tried to find peace. Sometimes they did. Sometimes the night remained a battlefield long after the candles went dark. The long night does not pass in one stretch. You wake in the dark, not once but twice. For in the Middle Ages sleep was rarely continuous. People spoke of first sleep and second sleep, with an interval in between, a waking pause when dreams were recalled, prayers were whispered, or quiet tasks were done. You sit up now, the curtains heavy around you, and feel the strange stillness of that midnight gap. Evidence from medical treatises and court diaries shows that segmented sleep was the norm. In those icy chambers, the first portion of slumber lasted a few hours, broken when the fire sank low and the cold pressed in. Monarchs might wake to sip warm ale or mulled wine, to pray, or simply to sit in thought. After this interlude, they returned to bed for the second sleep, rising only at dawn. One fascinating glimpse comes from a 15th-century French physician who described the interval as an ideal time for intimacy or reflection. For monarchs, it was often used for strategy. Imagine a king, half drowsy, murmuring plans to his closest advisors who stood waiting in the shadows. The chamber thus became both bedroom and council chamber in those liminal hours. Curiously, some writers praised this rhythm as healthier than unbroken sleep, claiming it aligned with the body's natural humours. Others condemned it, warning that too much wakefulness at night invited melancholy or evil spirits. Even among experts, no single view prevailed. What's clear is that kings and queens experienced the same restless awakenings that peasants did, but cloaked them in ritual and meaning. During that wakeful pause, monarchs might also read or have scriptures read aloud by attendants. You can almost hear the quiet murmur of psalms drifting through the curtains, the flicker of a candle flame catching the gold leaf of a manuscript page. The blend of faith and fatigue shaped the atmosphere, a space where body and soul were equally vulnerable. There are hints of stranger practices too. In some courts, physicians recommended stretching limbs or pacing briefly to aid digestion before returning to bed. Picture the odd sight of a queen in heavy nightgown and fur cap walking slow circles in her chamber, servants trailing with lanterns, while snow howled at the shutters. It is a scene both eerie and strangely relatable. Who among us has not wandered sleepless at night? The return to bed was like crossing a threshold again. Curtains drawn tight, coals perhaps refreshed, relics touched for reassurance. The second sleep tended to be deeper, dreams thicker, until the faint light of dawn seeped through the shutters. You lie back into that rhythm now, understanding that rest in a medieval castle was not linear but cyclical, 2 steps forward, 1 pause, then 2 steps again. And so you realize, even kings and queens, wrapped in silks and guarded by soldiers, lived with the same fragmented nights that touched every villager in the land. Their power did not grant unbroken sleep. It merely surrounded their waking hours with ritual, counsel, and whispers of faith. The stillness of the night pause leads your thoughts upward, beyond curtains and stone, to the sky itself. For medieval monarchs, sleep was not only shaped by warmth and ritual but also by the stars. Astrology threaded through their decisions, and the hours of rest were no exception. Court astrologers advised on when to sleep, when to wake, even which direction the bed should face. You smile at the thought. Rulers who commanded armies still deferred to the alignment of planets before shutting their eyes. Accounts from royal courts in England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire mention astrologers preparing natal charts and recommending auspicious hours of repose. It sounds extravagant, yet it reflected a deep belief that celestial bodies influenced health, mood, and dreams. A king might delay retiring if the stars were inauspicious, or might be urged to rise at dawn when Venus was favorable. Sleep became a negotiation not only with cold and hunger but with the heavens. An unusual anecdote survives about Catherine de' Medici, who reportedly kept astrologers close and often consulted them about daily rhythms, including rest. Did she truly believe her dreams were shaped by Jupiter's position? Or was it a psychological balm, reassuring her in turbulent times? Scholars remain divided, uncertain whether rulers wholeheartedly trusted such counsel or used it more as a tool of control and mystique. One eccentric detail lies in the placement of beds. Some medical astrological texts advised orienting the head toward the east to align with rising sun and renewal. Others suggested south for warmth. Imagine attendants dragging the heavy royal bed across rush-covered floors just to match an astrologer's chart. It may sound absurd now, but in that world, the cosmos was as present in the bedchamber as the fire in the hearth. The debate about dreams also entered this realm. Astrologers claimed to interpret royal visions, tying them to planetary movements. A nightmare after feasting might be blamed not on indigestion, but on Saturn's dark influence. A pleasant dream of sunlight and harvests could be praised as the work of benevolent Venus. Sleep itself became a stage for celestial theatre, with monarchs as both audience and actors. And yet, for all the grandeur of such ideas, the reality remained human. You can picture the queen shifting uncomfortably, no matter what the stars advised, tugging her furs closer because the draught through the shutter had no regard for constellations. Still, the belief brought comfort. To think one's night was written in the heavens was to impose order upon the chaos of cold and dark. Modern historians continue to wrestle with this interplay of science, superstition, and ritual. Was it true conviction? Or was it theatre, designed to impress courtiers and remind them that even a monarch's sleep was cosmic in scope? Perhaps it was both. In a world where winter stripped power bare, belief in the stars wrapped kings and queens in another kind of blanket. You lie back now, imagining the night sky glittering unseen beyond the castle walls. Inside the curtains, the monarch dreams beneath quilts of fur and silk. Outside, the heavens turn, indifferent yet deeply significant to those who believed their destinies were stitched among the constellations. The stars may not warm you, but they watch you, silently guiding the rhythm of every breath you take until dawn. The candles have burned low, the embers barely glow, and yet the chamber carries its own frost. You shift beneath the covers, and notice it, the sight of your own breath rising in pale mist. Imagine being a monarch, encased in velvet and fur, yet waking to see a puff of vapor drift before your face like smoke from your lungs. Cold has breached the fortress of curtains, and you realize that warmth here is always fragile. Contemporary accounts describe frost forming inside royal chambers during severe winters. Servants recorded mornings when bed curtains stiffened with rime, or when water in basins froze solid overnight. In 1407, a chronicler of the French court noted with astonishment that ice formed on a king's coverlet while he slept. Such details remind us that the struggle against winter was not metaphorical. It was physical, relentless, and inescapable. One odd little note emerges in letters. Courtiers sometimes joked about writing names in frost on the inside of glass, or even on bedposts. Picture a half-frozen noble tracing idle patterns at dawn while waiting for fires to be stoked. Even amidst discomfort, people found small ways to make light of misery. Specialists disagree on how common these extreme conditions were across castles. Some insist they occurred only in especially harsh winters. Others argue they were routine in northern Europe's stone fortresses. The truth likely lies between cold severe enough to wake monarchs in the night, yet not always every night. What is certain is that seeing your breath and feeling frost on your pillow was no rare shock for rulers. The sensation must have been startling. You lift the quilt to check, and the air strikes like knives. A queen might bury her face deeper into furs, muttering about drafts. A king might call sharply for attendants to stoke fires or bring more blankets. Imagine their frustration. Sovereigns of kingdoms, yet unable to command even the air in their bedchamber. There are stories of monarchs rising to find their ink frozen in inkwells or bread crusted with ice upon the table. Such anecdotes emphasize the sheer stubbornness of cold. The castle was a fortress, yes, but against enemies, not weather. Winter infiltrated it as surely as breath fills lungs. And you, lying beneath curtains, feel the same vulnerability. Each exhale fogs before your eyes, proof that the warmth of your body is no match for the vast chill pressing in. The bedding is heavy, the cap tight on your head, the socks thick, but none of it erases the reminder that you sleep inside a stone shell open to the sky's icy will. In that moment, sleep becomes fragile. How do you drift away when the air itself feels hostile? Perhaps you pull the dog closer at your feet, grateful for its heat. Perhaps you pray again, half dreaming, hoping dawn comes sooner. Perhaps you simply endure, teeth clenched, waiting for drowsiness to smother discomfort. Monarchs were no different. They woke, they shivered, they complained, they endured. So you close your eyes, frost sparkling faintly on the curtain's edge, your breath rising like smoke signals in the dark. You realize that for kings and queens, winter nights were not defined by power or wealth, but by resilience. They slept, yes, but always with the reminder that even rulers could not escape the breath of winter curling inside their most private sanctuary. The frost lingers in the air, but imagine now that the monarch is not in their usual chamber at all. Castles were not always permanent residences. Kings and queens travelled constantly, dragging their households across muddy roads and frozen fields. And with them came one of the strangest luxuries of power, a travelling bed. Royal itineraries reveal that beds were treated almost like thrones, symbols of authority as well as instruments of survival. When a ruler journeyed between fortresses, monasteries, or manors, carpenters dismantled the bed frame, packed its panels and posts, and hauled it by cart. Curtains, quilts, and pillows were bundled into trunks. Wherever the monarch stopped, servants reassembled the bed, as if erecting a portable palace. Imagine the relief of stepping into a new, drafty hall but finding the same familiar canopy waiting, like a fragment of home transplanted onto foreign stone. One curious detail preserved in household ordinances describes the process in almost ceremonial language. The king's bed was to be erected first in any new residence, before kitchens were arranged or councils convened. Comfort, or at least the semblance of continuity, mattered as much as governance. Even monarchs dreaded the shock of a cold, unfamiliar mattress. Researchers continue to discuss whether these traveling beds were truly practical for warmth or largely symbolic. Some argue that familiarity itself was a comfort, that sleeping in the same structure reduced the anxiety of endless journeys. Others suggest the true benefit lay in ensuring privacy, since the bed's curtains provided a known cocoon even in strange halls. Whatever the case, the spectacle of servants reassembling a royal bed wherever the ruler paused highlights the strange mixture of fragility and grandeur at the heart of kingship. One eccentric story tells of Henry VIII insisting that his portable bed accompany him on hunting expeditions, so that even in a rustic lodge he could rest beneath embroidered hangings. Picture the absurdity of such excess. Muddy boots, barking hounds, rough wooden walls, and then, in the corner, a towering four-poster glowing with crimson curtains. A monarch's sleep, no matter how impractical, could not be left to chance. And yet, the cold followed everywhere. Whether in Windsor, Rouen, or an abbey guesthouse, winter crept through shutters just the same. The familiar curtains helped, the layered quilts helped, but frost still gathered on glass, and breath still hung in the air. Comfort was portable, but only partially. The body still shivered, no matter how carefully the bed was rebuilt. You picture yourself now, trudging along with this royal procession, watching servants unload timber and fabric, assembling the same heavy structure again and again. The task is exhausting, yet vital. For at night, when the monarch lies down, the continuity of the bed tells them, you are still sovereign, even in exile, even in winter. So the travelling bed becomes more than furniture. It is a moving fortress against the night, a symbol of identity dragged across kingdoms. Inside it, kings and queens curled like anyone else, whispering prayers, tugging furs closer, watching frost form at the edges. Outside it, the world might change with every mile. Inside, at least for a few hours, they could pretend they slept in permanence. You imagine the bed being reassembled once more, but now your thoughts drift beyond the chamber walls to the peasants outside. For all their suffering, kings and queens endured the cold more comfortably than the villagers who served them. Comparison sharpens perspective. While the monarch lay beneath mountains of fur, peasants often slept on straw pallets scattered near a hearth, their bodies packed together like firewood. Contemporary records and illustrations reveal that common folk huddled as families, sometimes with livestock sharing the same space for warmth. A cow or sheep in the corner of a hut gave off more heat than any hearth. Meanwhile, in the castle, the ruler complained of drafts despite layers of squirrel fur. The irony is sharp royalty, surrounded by symbols of wealth, yet never fully shielded. Peasants in huts, warmed by their own closeness, surviving in ways the elite might never admit. A curious anecdote arises from manorial roles. Some villagers rotated places by the fire through the night, taking turns lying closest to the embers. Imagine the shuffle of bodies in the dark, the whispered negotiations of who deserved the warm spot. Contrast that with a monarch drawing curtains around their own private furnace of bedding. Both struggled with the same cold, though one cloaked the fight in velvet, the other in smoke and sweat. Researchers debate whether royals were truly more comfortable than peasants during harsh winters. Yes, the monarch had layers of bedding and servants to tend fires, but the sheer size of chambers and stone walls made them harder to heat than small cottages. Some suggest that peasants, despite their poverty, were often warmer in their low-roofed huts than kings in drafty great halls. Comfort, it seems, was not guaranteed by gold. One eccentric practice among villagers was to sleep in shifts, half resting, while others kept the fire alive. That cooperative rhythm contrasts with the monarch's reliance on attendants. The king might ring for servants to bring coals, while the peasants simply rose to feed the fire themselves. Both were interrupted by the demands of survival, but one endured it in public, the other within family bonds. Now picture it from the monarch's perspective. Perhaps he lay awake at night, listening to the storm, wondering vaguely how his subjects fared in their huts. Did empathy stir? Or did such thoughts never intrude upon the royal cocoon? Chronicles are silent, but the imagination lingers. You, lying here, sense the difference most keenly. Power bought layers, not immunity. The cold leveled everyone. So when kings and queens sighed about icy pillows and frost on their curtains, their discomfort was real, but relative. Outside, peasants lay shivering, sometimes too poor for quilts, sometimes relying on children's bodies for heat. Inside, monarchs cursed the draught that crept past velvet hangings. Both endured nights that felt endless. Both rose stiff at dawn. The cold, impartial as ever, spared no one. It only disguised itself differently: scratchy straw for the villager, silken quilt for the monarch. In the end, winter turned every sleeper into the same creature, huddled, anxious, waiting for warmth that would not come until the sun finally rose. The hush of the bedchamber hides another presence, the steady vigilance of night guards. Even as kings and queens attempted to rest, men in armor patrolled the halls, their breath fogging in the air as they paced cold corridors. You can almost hear the clank of mail, the muffled thud of boots on stone, the low murmur exchanged between two watchmen as they crossed paths. Sleep in a medieval castle was never entirely private. It was framed by the sound of protection. Administrative records from English and Burgundian courts make it clear that guards were assigned in shifts through the night, especially in winter when darkness lingered long. Their duty was not only to keep assassins and thieves at bay, but also to tend fires, check shutters, and ensure no accidents threatened the sovereign. Imagine the relief of a queen listening to distant footsteps, knowing someone circled the castle walls while she drowsed behind her curtains. Yet there's an odd twist. Some chronicles tell of guards required to call out the hour as they made their rounds. "All is well," they cried into the night, their voices echoing through passageways. It was meant to reassure, but one wonders if the interruptions ever irritated a monarch trying to stay asleep beneath heavy quilts. Still, the sound of vigilance was better than silence, which might suggest negligence or worse, danger. Specialists continue to disagree about how close these guards came to the royal chamber itself. Some argue that watchmen stood just outside the door, spears in hand, to ensure no intruder slipped past. Others maintain that guards kept their distance so as not to disturb the sanctity of the monarch's rest. The truth probably varied depending on the ruler's temperament. A paranoid king might demand men at his very bedside. A more relaxed one might send them to patrol the outer halls. One curious anecdote survives of guards warming themselves with mulled ale during long shifts, their voices growing louder as drink dulled the cold. Picture the faint laughter drifting upward, disturbing the solemn hush of a castle at night. Perhaps a king stirred in bed, annoyed, perhaps amused after all. Even soldiers needed some comfort in endless winter darkness. Animals, too, played their role in this nightly security. Great hounds lay in doorways, serving as both alarm and deterrent. Their low growls or sudden barks punctuated the night, startling sleepers but also reassuring them that nothing passed unnoticed. You hear it now, the deep bark of a mastiff echoing in the courtyard, followed by silence that seems sharper for the interruption. Security was not foolproof, of course. Tales exist of assassins scaling walls or conspirators sneaking into chambers despite guards. One French king famously ordered additional locks on his bed curtains, fearful that even his attendants might betray him. The image is striking. A monarch, cloaked in furs, fastening cords across velvet as if hiding from his own household. Fear, like cold, slipped beneath the door. Now you return to your imagined bed. The noises of guards filter through boots scraping stone. A bark, a shouted hour. These sounds mingle with the wind and the creak of wood, weaving a tapestry of vigilance and unease. Royalty may have rested their heads on embroidered pillows, but sleep was never solitary. It was watched, guarded, and surrounded by the footsteps of others pacing the long night away. The footsteps fade, and in the hush that follows, sleep presses in again, but dreams soon take over. For medieval monarchs, dreams were not idle fantasies. They were messages, warnings, or glimpses of destiny. You can imagine a king waking with a start, sweat dampening his fur-lined nightcap, convinced that the flickering images of sleep had meaning for his realm. Accounts from chronicles and letters show how seriously rulers regarded their dreams. Some were recorded by scribes the very next morning, preserved in annals alongside battles and treaties. A dream could be interpreted as divine favor, or as a sign of impending doom. Kings and queens did not dismiss their midnight visions, they treated them like dispatches from heaven itself. One curious record tells of Henry I of England, who reportedly dreamed of his ship sinking shortly before the White Ship disaster claimed his heir. Coincidence or prophecy? We cannot know, but to contemporaries it seemed confirmation that the night could whisper truths ignored in daylight. Interpretation of these visions often fell to court astrologers or confessors. They pored over symbols, linking a dream of wolves to rebellion, or a vision of fields to fertility and peace. Even nightmares stirred intense scrutiny. Imagine a queen describing a shadowy figure in her sleep, only to be told it signaled betrayal within her household. Trust, already fragile in courts of intrigue, could shatter from a single restless night. Researchers debate how much influence dreams truly had on political decisions. Some suggest they were used as rhetorical tools, rulers citing visions to justify choices they had already made. Others believe that, steeped in medieval piety, monarchs genuinely saw dreams as divine guidance. Either way, the images of the night bled into the strategies of the day. There were lighter sides as well. One eccentric account mentions a noble teasing his king for dreaming of geese, interpreting it as nothing more than indigestion from supper. Humor, too, had a place in these conversations, reminding us that even solemn beliefs could bend under the weight of laughter. But for the monarch lying awake after such a dream, the feeling must have been uneasy. Picture the silence of the chamber, the faint whistle of draughts through shutters, and the racing heart of a ruler, convinced that heaven had spoken. Sleep afterward would be shallow, fragmented, haunted by the echo of visions too vivid to ignore. You lie there with them now, heavy bedding pressing on your chest, the faint glow of a candle revealing the edges of the curtains. Your mind replays fragments of dream, a ship on stormy seas, a shadow at the door, a voice calling your name. Do they mean anything, or are they just the residue of wine and venison? You cannot decide. But in the medieval world, meaning was unavoidable. Every dream was a potential prophecy. Every night another chance for destiny to murmur in your ear. The weight of dreams lingers, but the cold demands practical remedies. You imagine an attendant approaching with a small wooden tray, setting it discreetly on a table near the bed. On it rests a goblet of steaming liquid, an herbal draught prepared to soothe body and mind. Monarchs did not rely only on layers of bedding. They often turned to potions and concoctions to coax sleep through the long winter nights. Records from apothecaries and royal household accounts mention honeyed drinks mixed with poppy seeds, chamomile, or valerian root. These herbs were believed to calm nerves, ease digestion, and encourage drowsiness. You lift the cup in your imagination, and sip the liquid is warm, thick with honey, faintly bitter with herbs. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, the bitterness in your throat. Sleep feels closer, if not entirely certain. One eccentric detail: some mixtures included saffron, prized not only for color and flavor but also for its supposed power to cheer the heart. Picture a monarch clutching a golden-hued potion, believing it would push away melancholy as well as cold. It was medicine and luxury in a single cup. Specialists remain divided about the effectiveness of these remedies. Some argue that they truly contained mild sedative properties. Others suggest the power was more psychological than chemical. Either way, the ritual mattered. To drink a carefully prepared potion before bed was to feel attended, protected, and hopeful that sleep would arrive without struggle. Not all remedies were gentle. Physicians sometimes prescribed stronger solutions, wine fortified with opiates or spiced concoctions laced with narcotics. Imagine the uneasy balance between relief and danger, the monarch slipping into heavy slumber while attendants prayed it was restorative, not fatal. The blurred line between cure and poison-haunted medieval medicine. There were also remedies burned, not sipped. Certain herbs were tossed onto coals so their smoke might purify the air. You catch the scent of sage or rosemary filling the curtains, the smoke curling into your nostrils until your eyes sting faintly. Was it healing, or just another layer of discomfort? Even now, scholars debate whether such fumigations had genuine effect or served mostly as ritual gestures. And then there were comfort foods, warm ale mixed with milk, or a thick broth carried to the bedside. The warmth filled the stomach, dulling hunger pangs in winter when meals could be irregular. Monarchs, like their subjects, knew that a full belly often coaxed better sleep. You place the goblet down and lie back, the warmth spreading through your chest, the bitterness settling in your stomach. You sense the blend of faith, science, and hope that surrounded these nightly remedies. Nothing guaranteed sleep in a frozen castle, but each sip and sniff of herbs was a promise that someone had tried. The monarchs who commanded armies still relied on fragile comforts, cups of honeyed herbs, pouches of saffron, or the smoke of rosemary curling through the night. You close your eyes with them now, the draught softening your breath, the cold still pressing at the edges, but sleep feeling just a little closer. You stir from drowsiness, and for a moment it feels as if the cold itself has crept beneath the curtains. Then you realize it is not imagination. Snow has found its way inside. In the harshest winters, even castle walls could not fully hold back the weather. Servants recorded mornings when thin drifts collected on window ledges, or when flakes blew through cracks in shutters and arrow slits, dusting the floor with white. Imagine waking to see frost sparkling on your quilt, delicate yet merciless. Surviving letters and chronicles describe such scenes without exaggeration. A courtier in Scotland once wrote of finding snow on the bed curtains themselves, shaken loose when the wind howled strongest. If kings and queens were startled, so too were their attendants, who hurried to sweep away the icy trespass before it melted into dampness. An unusual custom emerges in these accounts. Some chambers were fitted with extra wooden boards pressed against shutters in deep winter, almost like makeshift barricades against the storm. Yet the wind was crafty. It forced flakes through the tiniest seams, swirling them into the chamber as if to remind royalty of nature's dominion. Imagine lying half asleep, only to feel a cold flake land upon your cheek. The shock would steal your breath more sharply than any nightmare. Researchers remain uncertain how common this infiltration was. Some argue it plagued only northern castles. Others suggest that in particularly brutal seasons, even southern courts experienced it. The lack of consistent records leaves the question open. But the anecdotes that survive paint vivid pictures of monarchs humbled by snow beneath their own roofs. One eccentric story from German sources tells of servants rushing to light extra torches and braziers when snow actually piled inside a hall, creating miniature drifts that had to be shoveled out. You can almost hear their laughter mixed with exasperation, as if the castle itself had joined the storm. For the monarch under the covers, however, it was no laughing matter. The dampness that followed was worse than the flakes themselves. Wet quilts chilled the body faster than dry cold, and illness lurked in every shiver. Servants scrambled to replace soiled bedding, dragging furs toward the fire to dry while the ruler tried to cling to scraps of warmth. Picture yourself now, tucked inside, hearing the rattle of shutters as a blizzard roars. The curtains sway slightly with each gust, then a tickle on your hand. A snowflake has slipped inside, melting instantly on your skin. You pull the covers tighter, but the reminder is sharp. No curtain, no wall, no bed can keep winter fully at bay. So the monarch endured. They pulled furs close, called for more blankets, perhaps muttered a prayer that dawn would come swiftly. And in those moments, stripped of ceremony, they were as vulnerable as any peasant in a hut, just another human, startled awake by snow drifting into their supposed fortress. The snow has been swept away. the curtains secured once more, and yet the bed is not only a place of sleep. You realize that for monarchs, it was also a stage for intimacy, sometimes tender, sometimes strategic. Beneath the canopy, heirs were conceived, alliances sealed, and affections shared. The warmth of another body was as powerful against the cold as any fur. Records from royal households reveal that kings and queens did not always sleep apart, as later centuries might suggest. In fact, their shared bed was a visible sign of unity, both personal and political. When the queen joined the king under the quilts, the entire court understood its significance. Heirs might be in the making, or reconciliation after disputes might be underway. The act of sharing a bed extended far beyond private comfort. It was watched, whispered about, and recorded. One intriguing anecdote comes from the court of France, where observers noted which nights the royal couple retired together and which they did not. Such details were of state importance. Imagine attendants carefully marking down the monarch's movements as if they were matters of war. The bed was both cradle of lineage and ledger of duty. But intimacy was not always marital. Favorites, mistresses, or companions sometimes occupied the royal bed. Oddly enough, the practice could be more political than romantic. Sharing warmth was a privilege, a signal of favor, and often a tool of influence. A noble who spent the night near the king might find themselves in a stronger position come morning. Scholars continue to debate whether these arrangements were as frequent as chronicles suggest, or whether gossip exaggerated them. Either way, the bed remained a place where politics and flesh entwined. There are lighter, more human details too. Letters hint at monarchs grumbling about cold feet, nudging partners closer, or stealing the better share of blankets. Imagine Henry VIII pulling furs greedily toward himself, or a queen laughing softly as her hands warmed against her husband's side. For all the grandeur of titles, in these moments they were simply people craving warmth and closeness. Of course, there were risks. Intimacy could spark scandal, fuel rumors, or stir jealous rivalries. The royal bed was never entirely private. Servants prepared it, guards stood nearby, and attendants often remained in adjoining rooms. Even passion was threaded with performance. The monarch might whisper sweet words in the dark, knowing full well that others would guess or gossip by morning. One eccentric practice recorded in Spain involved couples drinking spiced wine together before bed, believed to kindle both warmth and fertility. Whether it worked or not, the ritual itself created intimacy, blending comfort with expectation. You picture the goblets gleaming in firelight, the liquid thick with cinnamon, before the curtains were drawn. Now, as you lie here beneath the imagined furs, you sense the paradox. The bed was private, yet public. It was intimate, yet political. It was where love might bloom or alliances be sealed, but always against the backdrop of cold stone walls and watchful attendants. For kings and queens, even warmth in another's arms carried weight beyond the personal. It was history being written under the quilts. The warmth of closeness fades, and another reality of winter nights presses in: illness. For monarchs, the cold chamber was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Imagine waking in the dark, breath wheezing, chest heavy, the chill clinging to your lungs. In an age without antibiotics, a simple cough could spiral into fever, and fever into tragedy. Household physicians often blamed bad airs that seeped into the body during sleep. Their writings warn against drafts creeping through shutters or dampness settling in bedding. Monarchs were advised to keep their heads covered, to drink warming tonics, and to avoid sleeping too near walls heavy with frost. Yet even with such care, records overflow with accounts of colds, chills, and winter fevers endured in royal chambers. One striking example: Henry VII of England was notorious for keeping fires stoked high, fearing the ailments that cold might provoke. His paranoia reflected lived experience. His court, like many others, was plagued by outbreaks of influenza and pneumonia during long winters. A monarch might rule armies, but he could not rule his own lungs. An eccentric detail emerges from medical accounts. Leeches or cupping glasses were sometimes used at night, applied even in bed, to draw out bad humours. Imagine the discomfort of lying beneath heavy quilts, weak with fever, while attendants fussed with bloodletting bowls and herbs meant to balance the body. Sleep must have been restless, tangled with both illness and treatment. Scholars continue to argue whether cold itself caused these ailments, or whether crowded, smoky chambers worsened them. Some suggest damp air was the true culprit. Others insist that poor hygiene made infection inevitable. Whatever the cause, monarchs faced nights punctuated by coughing fits, headaches, and sweats that left sheets clammy. The sounds of illness carried through the chamber. You can almost hear it now, a hacking cough echoing off stone, the rustle of attendants fetching water, the crack of logs thrown hastily onto the fire. For courtiers sleeping nearby, the reminder was grim. Even the sovereign was mortal, vulnerable to the same chills that stalked their subjects. One curious remedy prescribed to sleepless monarchs was heated wine mixed with cloves and pepper. The drink burned the throat, but was thought to chase away cold from the inside. Another remedy was far less pleasant poultices of mustard or onion, spread hot upon the chest. Imagine the sting of such concoctions against pale royal skin, endured in hope of one more night's rest. You lie beneath the imagined furs and feel how fragile the royal body was, despite crowns and armies. Winter pressed mercilessly, breeding sickness that no wealth could fully ward off. Monarchs endured as their people did, shivering, sweating, coughing into the dark, waiting for dawn. Their only advantage lay in attendants hovering with remedies, not in immunity. And so, when you think of royal sleep, do not picture serene faces in golden chambers. Picture rest interrupted by coughing, bedding damp with fever, servants whispering prayers over a sovereign who looked no stronger than any villager's child. The cold was democracy at its harshest, reminding every sleeper that kings and queens, too, could be undone by a winter's night. The coughing quiets, but the cold continues its slow siege, pressing against the very structure of the castle itself. You look around the chamber and notice how the architecture strains to adapt. These walls were built for defense, not comfort, and every winter forced nobles to improvise ways of softening stone into something livable. Tapestries were the most obvious answer, great swathes of wool and silk covering walls otherwise bare. Contemporary inventories list dozens, sometimes hundreds, of hangings rotated with the seasons. In winter, the heaviest sets were brought out, woven thick to block drafts. Step close and run your hand across one, and you feel its scratchy warmth, the fibers dense enough to muffle echoes. They told stories of saints, hunts, or battles, but their real triumph was insulation. One unusual tactic described in accounts was hanging tapestries not only on walls but across doorways, creating makeshift barriers. You picture the Queen's chamber with heavy cloth draped from lintel to floor, turning corridors into muffled tunnels. The effect was cozy, yes, but also claustrophobic, as though the castle itself had shrunk in response to winter's bite. Scholars are divided on how effective these measures really were. Some believe the combination of tapestries, carpets, and rushes genuinely raised the temperature by several degrees. Others argue that they merely dulled the edge of drafts, leaving rooms still frigid but slightly less unbearable. Either way, monarchs spent fortunes on fabric that blurred the line between art and insulation. Oddly enough, even the furniture itself became part of this battle. Beds, chairs, and benches were often draped with covers in winter, creating layers of warmth. In some cases, special bed tents were erected inside chambers, essentially fabric rooms within stone rooms. Imagine the king retreating each night into a smaller fortress of cloth, hiding from the vast cold hall that surrounded him. There are eccentric notes too. In certain castles, windows were stuffed with wool or reeds in deep winter, a crude form of insulation that left rooms dim but less drafty. Servants jammed material into cracks, then draped shutters with skins. The look must have been shabby compared to gilded banners, but survival outweighed elegance. Floor coverings mattered as well. Rushes scattered across stone-trapped heat, while carpets imported from the east became prized possessions. Imagine stepping down from bed in thick socks onto a layer of woven wool instead of bare stone. It could mean the difference between a sharp gasp and a tolerable start to the day. Yet for all these adaptations, the cold still claimed victory. Morning frost still crept across glass, and breath still puffed in the air. The architecture resisted only so much. The rest was endured. You realize now that even kings and queens, surrounded by luxury, lived in houses that constantly reminded them of the elements. The castle was a fortress against men, not against weather. And so you settle back into the bed, listening to the fabric sway, feeling the draft dulled but not defeated. The walls hold firm against armies, but the cold still slides through them like an invisible enemy, undefeated, eternal. The walls and curtains hold the frost at bay as best they can, but the chamber is far from silent. You begin to notice the soundscape of a royal night, a strange mixture of solemnity and intrusion. Sleep for kings and queens was never wrapped in silence. It was stitched together with noises that reminded them they were never truly alone. First come the animals. Dogs stir restlessly at the foot of the bed or in the hall beyond, claws scraping on stone as they shift. Their occasional bark echoes through corridors, sharp and startling. Cats, too, padded through chambers, hunting the rats that feasted on rushes and scraps. Imagine the scuffle of paws in the dark, a hiss, the squeak of prey caught. Even royalty's dreams carried the soundtrack of vermin chased through the night. Then there are the servants. Not all retired when the monarch did. Some remained in adjoining rooms, ready to answer calls for fresh logs or a warm drink. Their whispers and soft footsteps leaked through curtains, constant reminders that the bedchamber was never truly private. Household ordinances describe grooms of the bedchamber, whose duty was to remain within earshot all night. Imagine dozing off while hearing the faint rustle of someone stoking the fire only yards away. Church bells rang out too, marking canonical hours. The faint toll drifted through the castle walls, solemn and regular. Monks rose for midnight prayers in nearby chapels, their chants sometimes audible in the silence of a sleeping court. The sound would drift through stone, low and resonant, like the heartbeat of the medieval night. One unusual account describes the clamour of clocks added in later centuries, mechanical contraptions that chimed with jarring precision, interrupting dreams. In earlier times, the bells themselves sufficed, their rhythm carrying both reassurance and disruption. Scholars remain uncertain how these overlapping sounds affected royal sleep. Some argue that medieval people were simply more accustomed to background noise, their bodies lulled by it rather than disturbed. Others believe insomnia was rampant, worsened by every bark, toll, and whisper. Either way, silence was a rarity. The castle was alive even when its ruler tried to rest. Add to this the unpredictable noises of weather wind groaning through beams, shutters banging loose, rain hammering against leaded glass. Thunder rolled through the halls, amplified by stone, turning storms into concerts. Lightning cast sudden shadows through cracks in curtains, frightening even hardened rulers. You lie there, hearing it all, realizing how hard it was to escape the clamour of the world. A peculiar, almost comic note appears in some letters, frogs croaking in castle moats, their chorus audible even through thick walls. Imagine a monarch tossing in bed, sighing at the racket of frogs that refused to honour royal authority. So the soundscape of royal sleep was layered, restless, unignorable. Dogs, servants, bells, wind, even frogs all intruded into the canopy's fragile calm. You realize that true silence belonged to no one, not even kings and queens. They closed their eyes, surrounded by a chorus they could not command, lulled or disturbed by the living pulse of their castle. The chamber hums with its chorus of noises, but sometimes the greatest disturbances came from within. Monarchs were as human as any villager, and many struggled with sleeplessness. Chroniclers recorded tales of rulers pacing their halls at night, haunted by thoughts or tormented by unrest. These legends wove themselves into memory, shaping images of kings and queens who could not find peace even beneath mountains of quilts. One story tells of Charles VI of France, who suffered bouts of insomnia during his troubled reign. He was said to wander through his palace at night, muttering to himself, his attendants trailing with candles. Whether from illness, anxiety, or superstition, the result was the same royal night stretched long, and rest seemed distant. His sleeplessness was not just personal but political, feeding fears about the stability of the crown. Another curious tale emerges from England. Richard III, later vilified by Shakespeare, was rumoured to sleep poorly, plagued by dreams of betrayal. Chronicles hint that his restlessness grew worse in winter, when the cold pressed hardest. Was it guilt, paranoia, or merely the discomfort of icy stone chambers? Scholars cannot say. The lines between history and legend blur, but the image of a restless king, tossing beneath embroidered curtains, lingers strongly. Accounts also speak of queens troubled by sleepless nights. Catherine of Aragon, during her years of exile in chilly English manors, reportedly endured nights of prayer rather than slumber. Wrapped in coarse blankets instead of royal furs, she sought comfort not from warmth but from whispered devotion. Sleep became less about restoration and more about endurance. Researchers today continue to argue whether these reports reflect genuine insomnia or simply propaganda. Some suggest that tales of sleepless monarchs symbolized troubled reigns, restlessness as metaphor for instability. Others believe the accounts are literal, for the conditions of medieval castles made true rest difficult. Draughts, noise, illness, and heavy meals all conspired to rob even the most powerful of sleep. One eccentric anecdote suggests that a French king once blamed his sleeplessness on mischievous servants hiding live birds in the rafters, their fluttering wings waking him at odd hours. Whether true or not, the story highlights how fragile the boundary was between comfort and disruption. Now picture yourself lying awake with them, staring into the dark canopy, hearing the wind outside and the quiet snores of companions nearby. The mind, already burdened with responsibility, spins faster in the still hours. Doubts grow louder, fears sharper. In those moments, crowns mean nothing. You are simply another human struggling to quiet your thoughts long enough to drift away. Legends of sleepless monarchs remind you that winter nights were as much psychological battles as physical ones. Cold, noise, and duty pressed down together, making rest elusive. When kings and queens failed to sleep, the whole realm seemed to tremble with them. At last, the long night yields to a faint grey glow creeping through the shutters. You feel it before you see it, the change in the air, a softening of the darkness, a promise that morning has finally broken winter's grip. The monarch stirs beneath the quilts, joints stiff, limbs heavy, but grateful for the relief of light. No matter how restless the night haunted by cold, noise, dreams, or illness dawn, always carried a sense of survival. Royal mornings began with ritual. Servants entered quietly, bearing warm water in metal basins. The splash echoed as it was poured, steam rising briefly before the air snatched it away. Imagine dipping your hands into that water, icy by modern standards but blissfully warm to someone who had slept in a freezing chamber. The sting awakened bloodless fingers, reminding the monarch that the body was still alive, still capable of motion after the long assault of night. Contemporary records describe the careful process of dressing, layers of linen, wool, and fur, donned with the assistance of attendants. Each garment was like armor against the lingering cold. A heavy cloak went on last, thrown around shoulders while the monarch sat on the bed's edge, yawning, sometimes sneezing. Even kings and queens, for all their dignity, began the day with bleary eyes and stiff muscles. One unusual custom noted in certain courts was the offering of spiced wine or broth immediately upon waking. It was thought to warm the stomach and prepare the body for the day's demands. Picture the monarch sipping slowly, still half asleep. the taste of cinnamon or clove replacing the bitterness of night air. For a brief moment, the chamber felt less hostile. Debate among historians continues over whether mornings were truly invigorating or merely another ordeal. Some believe monarchs relished the renewal, rising with a sense of triumph at having endured. Others argue they often emerged exhausted, their health chipped away by chronic cold and restless sleep. The truth likely lies somewhere between resilience mingled with fatigue, masked by ceremony. One eccentric image remains: attendants brushing frost off bed curtains, shaking them as if they were snowy cloaks. Imagine servants scurrying with cloths, wiping moisture from window glass. While the monarch muttered about the hardships of kingship, these were the mundane beginnings of days that might end in councils, battles, or banquets. Power always started with the simplest human acts: rising stiff from bed, splashing water on the face, bracing against the chill. Now you step into that dawn with them. The candles gutter out, their wax dripping into silence. The curtains part, and light spills across quilts rumpled from tossing. You rise slowly, legs trembling with the effort, but a sense of relief floods you. The worst is over. Another winter's night has been endured. The day ahead will bring its own trials. But for now, you simply breathe, grateful that warmth has returned with the Sunday. And so, you have walked through the long winter nights of kings and queens, sharing their chambers of stone and frost, their heavy curtains and crowded beds. You have felt the sting of draughts, smelled the mingling of tallow and herbs, and heard the restless chorus of guards, dogs, and wind. You have seen how even crowns could not command warmth, how every comfort was improvised, fragile and fleeting. Let your mind now drift more slowly. Imagine the bedchamber not as a place of discomfort, but as a quiet sanctuary. The fire is low but steady, its glow no longer harsh but soft, painting the stone walls with gentle light. The curtains, once a shield, now sway like sails in a calm breeze. The sounds of the castle fade, muffled into the background until they resemble nothing more than the hush of distant waves. You picture the monarch at last, sinking into genuine rest, body heavy, mind quiet. The fears of spirits, the burden of politics, the discomfort of cold, these dissolve in the calm rhythm of breath. The bed, once a fortress against winter, becomes a cradle of stillness. You share that cradle now, feeling the weight of blankets not as suffocation but as comfort, grounding you, holding you close. Outside, frost glitters on the battlements, untouched by the warmth within. The world is frozen, but you are safe. Dawn will return soon enough, bringing noise, duty, and demands. But for now, in this moment, there is only calm. The night stretches softly, endlessly, inviting you to let go. So close your eyes, release the chill, and drift gently into sleep. Sweet dreams, until morning comes.